Hello and welcome to another week of Talking Faith, the weekly devotional where Cal and I spend a little bit of time reflecting over what God has been speaking through in our own hearts as we've been reading through Scripture. And this week we're going to be continuing on our journey through the Psalms as we've been going through over the last few weeks. We're going to be looking into Psalm chapter 23 this week, a very familiar psalm that many of you will know even off the top of your head. It's a powerful psalm, it's a really good psalm, and Cal's going to read it for us just in a moment. But just before he does, I would urge you just to get yourself a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, sit down and just relax as we continue talking faith together.
The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me.
So Psalm chapter 23, a passage that I'm sure we've heard many times. I remember when I was growing up and going to people's houses for our YFs, which was our young people hanging out in people's houses around the church. This would probably be the verse that we saw most often up in people's walls. It is definitely something that people love. Why? Well, because it's a very well-crafted poem. David, as he's writing this, shows his skill as a poet here, probably more than any other of his poems. It is beautiful and it connects with every single person. Why? Because the illustration at its heart, that of a shepherd, is familiar to all of us. Probably more so for the person back then than for us now. Because if you weren't a shepherd, probably your cousin or your family friend was. Many people had that profession and it was a common job, a common reality that many people knew and that King David knew, as his first job while he was growing up was that of a shepherd. It's an interesting position, but it's somewhat different than the shepherd that we maybe talk about now today. Obviously it's the same job, but the way it was handled was somewhat different. Today, most of the time, you're taking sheep from one field to another field. It's very close by. You're not going in long, arduous journeys with your sheep. And actually, your sheepdog is what encourages the dog to go from A to B. But in the Middle East, all those years ago, in the day of Jesus, and then before that here in this passage in the day of King David, it was very much so the shepherd's voice that guided the sheep. As the shepherd moved from point A to point B, he would be speaking, if not singing, and his sheep would follow after him. And if they've went too far and they can't see him, well, they can hear him and they go towards it. I wonder whose voice was the first one that you memorized, where if you got a phone call back in the days before caller ID, you knew instantly just from the hello who it is and the joy that that brought. For me, it was my cousin. Every now and then he'd be calling, and essentially that call was to signal, soon I'll be coming over to stay and to spend time with you. It was a voice that I knew, and as soon as I heard that hello, joy entered my heart, comfort entered my heart, because I was like, it's my cousin Mark. Soon I'll be able to go see him. And that is the joy that a sheep would have when they hear the voice of their shepherd. They would be filled with joy, filled with comfort, because they know they are safe. Their shepherd, they may not be able to see, but they can hear him just over that way. So they're going to go and they're going to follow him as he continues to lead them from green pasture through the valleys to another green pasture. Their shepherd was the one that brought them comfort. Their shepherd was the one they knew and they had a relationship with. And this is what David is capturing here in this psalm, that connection that the shepherd has to his sheep. And what he's saying is God has that connection to us. He is the shepherd that we follow. We follow after his voice. It says in John chapter 10, Jesus is talking about being the good shepherd, and at one point he brings out, the sheep know my voice. What he's saying is we as Christians, we know the voice of Jesus. They know the voice of our good shepherd who we follow day in and day out. And through following him from green pasture, through the valleys where things can be tough, into a new green pasture, we are called to rely on him, to follow him, and to trust in him as he guides us. And when the times get tough, when we're through that dark valley, knowing that his rod and his staff, They comfort us because He's there protecting us, living through that experience with us, looking forward to the day where we go back into a green pasture with Jesus by our side again. And that's the encouragement that I think Psalm chapter 23 brings to us, this relationship that we have to God where we are following Him, the God who lives, who dwells within us, and we are called to listen to His voice, to follow after His voice as He guides us through life, knowing that in the good times and the bad times, He's with us. Now, how do we follow His voice? How do we hear His voice? Well, we hear it through preaching that happens here at Killamant and through many other churches. We hear it through reading the Bible ourselves. We hear it through songs of worship during our time of prayer. We hear it through our connection to God, the relationship we have with Him. And He calls us to follow Him in the good times and in the bad. Follow Him as He guides us towards that next green pasture. Hopefully that's an encouragement to you today as we continue thinking through our walk with God and how He guides us by the sound of His voice. God bless.